This episode of the Neurodivergent Experience is brought to you by RTN Mental Health Solutions. With up to a 5-year waiting list for autism and ADHD assessments via the NHS, and that's even if you get a referral from your GP, getting an assessment in the UK has never been harder. So if you're like me and can't wait anymore, going private may be the best option for you. RTN offers online assessments for kids aged 6 right up to adults, with prices starting at £900. To make it more accessible, RTN can offer payment plans up to 5 months. You can access their remote services from the comfort of your home anywhere in the UK, and RTN offers group and one-to-one counselling, a private route to access ADHD medication following the assessment, and will even fight for you if your GP doesn't accept the results. So if you live in the UK and can't wait to get an assessment, go to www.rtnmentalhealthsolutions.com and use the discount code RTN23, making it even more affordable for all of our listeners to get an autism and ADHD assessment. Hello, Simon here from the Neurodivergent Experience podcast. Thank you for listening to this episode. We are currently taking a break for January as I'm moving house and Jordan is currently sunning himself on a beach somewhere. We will be back with season 2 in February. But in the meantime, please enjoy some of our listeners' favourite episodes.
Hello, and welcome to the Neurodivergent Experience. I'm Jordan James, also known as the Autistic Photographer, and I'm joined by my co-host and very good friend, Simon Scott.
And for this episode of the Neurodivergent Experience, we are talking to Steve Silberman. He is an award-winning science writer and is the author of NeuroTribes, The Legacy of Autism and the Future of Neurodiversity.
Thank you so much, guys. I'm so honored to be here. I really appreciate the invitation.
Oh, we are honoured to have you here, Steve. I'm a huge fan. I'll go into that into just a minute. I just wanted to say thank you because I was very, very surprised to get your email in return to as an offer for this podcast. So I wanted to say thank you. Thank you for being here. It means a lot to both of us.
Yeah, it really does. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I especially, one reason why I, offered to do it was that I especially like encouraging neurodivergent podcasters to do their thing. And I've also, you sent me a copy of your book. Is it out yet? Is it available?
Yeah, it came out last year.
Yeah.
I'm just going to quickly plug it. The Autistic Experience.
Please do. The Autistic Experience. It's a wonderful chorus of neurodivergent voices attesting to their own experience and to the challenges that they faced in a world built for neurotypical people. And you did a really good job of covering lots of diversity within the neurodivergent community. And it's a beautiful and powerful book. So thank you for writing it.
There's a lot of people that have said a lot of lovely things about this book, and that is the absolute best thing I've ever heard. And let me tell the listeners why. And now I get to tell you why I wanted you here, why I'm such a big fan. In 2018, I was diagnosed with depression. My depression was due to the fact that in work I made a mistake. The people at my work blamed me being autistic. I therefore decided that, because I was already diagnosed, that I really hated being autistic because it meant that I was really terrible at things and I only could see the negative. In 2019, I started sharing my photography. I found photography and it really showed me that being autistic is actually a really positive thing. Being autistic, being ADHD really helped me with my hyperfocus with my photography, and I got very good very quickly. But then I was thinking, I want to learn more about this positive feeling, and I went straight to your book because I loved the title because I'm a big fan. I'm a huge fan of evolution. Evolution is actually my actual special interest. and the evolution of like autistic people and why we exist, the neurodivergent mind, why it's important. And I thought NeuroTribes, because obviously tribes being a very evolutionary thing within the human species, within the ape species, we are tribes. And I loved the NeuroTribe idea of like, oh, we're all going to come together with this. And I listened to your book and it set a fire in me that will never go out. And that fire was, these are my people. I'm going to fight for my people. And it is what I did. It is what I continue to do every day online, in real life. My entire family is neurodivergent. My wife, both my kids, all my friends. We are a tribe. We're a family. We're a neuro family. And it was your words and the history as well. I'm a huge fan of history.
Myself as well. The history aspects of the book are just incredible.
Incredible.
Thank you.
And that is why I really felt like, oh, I want to advocate and I want to make change. And it was your book that lit that fire. So I want to thank you for that, because everything I do is because of that fire that you, Steve Silberman, you set that fire.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful and so honored. And that's in my wildest dreams. That's what I hoped would happen. Just so you know, I'll give you the author's perspective on writing a book that, you know, has sparked a fire in lots of people's lives. The whole time I was writing it, I thought I was a failure. I thought that I knew that it was not like any other autism book that had ever been written before, but I thought maybe that was bad. And I was actually afraid to show it to my editor for years. Because I kept thinking, like, no, I have to add another chapter and then she'll see that it's really, you know, special. And so the whole time, you know, I was broke. I was stressed out. My mom was diagnosed with dementia eventually. And it was sort of a very stressful period where I did not know that the book would ever reach an audience. And I'll tell you the first sign that I had that it might be okay, actually, which was, do you guys know who Oliver Sacks was? Neurologist, author of The Man Who Mistook His Wife.
I'm aware of the name, yeah.
Yeah. He was a very brilliant neurologist and my friend. And he wrote a book called An Anthropologist on Mars about Temple Grandin that for its time was a very, very progressive and compassionate view of autistic people. And I had been talking to him about the book because we were friends the whole time I was writing it, but he died eventually. But then I sent the first copy of the book that anybody had ever seen. My husband hadn't even seen it. I sent it to his editor and assistant, Kate Edgar, because since she had edited his books, I knew that, you know, she was a good editor and that she would tell me the truth. And so when I woke up the next morning, there were a series of text messages on my phone. She had stayed up all night reading it. And, you know, some of the text messages were like, you know, I'm on page 147. I'm weeping. You know, so I actually like cried for gratitude because, you know, she liked it. And I figured, well, if Kate Edgar likes it, then maybe other people will like it too. But that was the first redeeming, you know, sign of hope that I had for almost 5 years of writing.
Well, I must say the book actually does have many moments of hope, I think, for a lot of people, Steve. I think that's why it resonates with so many people. As somebody who's only just being diagnosed, I suppose within the last, it's 18 months now, your book was so affirming for somebody who did feel like there was something wrong with them for such a very long time. It does very much humanize my own experiences, so I can understand why your editor found it that way, because I find it that way. I've yet to read the entirety of the book, Steve, because I keep having to go back and catching up on chapters, because I find I read something and reflect and then want to go back and reflect on it more and feel like whether I've missed something. So again, thank you for that. But there are some topics within the book that I found absolutely fascinating, and especially when you were talking about Dr. Asperger, which is something that I know that Jordan and I would really love to touch on. So if you could, for our listeners that maybe haven't read the book, would you be able to paint a picture of the man? Because from my understanding of looking at him, there is a lot of misconception and misunderstanding as to who he was and what his motives with understanding autistic people were.
Well, sure. That's probably the naughtiest question that we could begin with, but I'll go right to it. Hans Asperger worked at a clinic in Vienna before World War II that was a very progressive and inclusive place for neurodivergent people. It was basically a place of last resort where parents would send kids who had been kicked out of schools or arrested, for crimes or whatever. And so they would send them to Asperger's clinic, where they had a very compassionate group of clinicians, including a woman named Victorine Zach, who was apparently very good with working with non-speaking children. And they had art on the walls and furniture that had been purpose-built for the clinic that was like nice, so it wasn't like hospital furniture or something like that. They would have plays that the kids in the clinic would put on Sunday mornings. They had walks in the garden. So that all sounds really nice. And an American psychiatrist who visited the clinic in the years before the war said that the conception of what was normal or abnormal in the clinic was unusually loose, in that behavior was only considered problematic if the behavior was problematic for the child and created problems for the child. So in other words, in a lot of psychiatry, really, for most of the 20th century, if you did weird things or, stimmed or whatever, like that was proof that you had a disease or a syndrome, and that, that behavior should be literally electric shocked out of you in America. But so Asperger's clinic was much more progressive than that, but there was a big problem, which was in the late 30s, the Nazis took over Austria, and many of Asperger's bosses were Nazis already. The ones that weren't either committed suicide or fled, and some of them died in concentration camps. But so the Nazis took over, and eugenics laws were issued from Berlin. And there was a killing center established by the Nazis that someone from Asperger's clinic ended up running. I talk about this in detail in the book. And so Asperger referred, as far as I know, 2 children to that clinic, which is bad. Like there's no way that that's good, except the one thing to understand is that working as a medical doctor and particularly a psychologist under the Nazis was really difficult. And in fact, some medical students who protested the eugenics laws in Berlin were beheaded publicly. They were known as the White Rose. So Asperger elected to stay in his position, which the authors of a competing book to mine in a different key frame as, Asperger supported the Nazis. If you read his writing, it's clear that he didn't. And in fact, he makes a very powerful plea for society to consider autism and other forms of neurodivergence as qualities that require support and guidance from the community for across the whole lifespan. Meanwhile, in America, shortly thereafter, autism was considered a childhood disease that was caused by bad parenting, etc. So Asperger's clinic was a core of anti-Nazi resistance. And I'm not saying that myself. I am quoting the words of a Jewish boy who was concealed by one of Asperger's colleagues through the war. And they even like went to the opera and stuff like that. Needless to say, if that colleague of Asperger's had been discovered and everyone in the clinic knew it was happening, they would have all gone to the Gestapo and been killed or at least imprisoned, probably killed. And so they protected him through the war. The problem is that the authors of this competing book, in a different key, had access to a scholar named Herwig Czech, who was the source of all the Asperger, or most of the Asperger was a Nazi stuff. Herwig Czech had been talking to me because I got in touch with him for like 7 years, but never telling me anything, even though he always promised me that he would. He would always say, "Oh, I'm busy right now. I'll talk to you in 6 months." What I didn't know was that he had made an exclusive agreement with the authors of the other book to not give me that information and to give it to them. And so I did not have access to that information while I was writing the book. Once their book came out and I saw what that guy had given to them, and I talked to one of the authors and he told me, I said, I'm a journalist. I don't think this is ethical for you to, sort of make some private agreement with a scholar, And he said, "You're a print guy. We're television people."
Oh,
if you can believe
the amount of times I've heard that, Steve, after working in broadcasting myself, it drives me insane.
You're right. I almost couldn't believe it. But so now, unfortunately, and there's a woman named Edith Schaeffer who wrote a book called Asperger's Children. If you actually read Asperger's Children, which I don't think many people have done, you see that her son had been recently diagnosed, and she says he hates the label autistic, So she's basically, a lot of parents, start out in that position where they hate the label, but eventually neurodivergent people, many of them embrace the label because it explains why they were bullied, why they were, struggling in school, etc. So what she does is she talks about how neurodivergent people were treated in Germany during the war. It was terrible. There was an extermination program against them. That's all true. Horrific. I write about it in NeuroTribes too.
Yeah, right. It's very difficult to hear.
Right. But what she doesn't do is talk about what was happening in America at the same time, which was we were sterilizing neurodivergent people. We were giving them lobotomies and electric shock, putting them in institutions. So Edith's book weirdly suggests that, yes, Germany was evil, but it was incredibly evil. Yes, it was. And so were we. And she doesn't say that. So anyway, that's my take on what's happened. Someday I will write more about this because there's much more to say. I did go back and make a couple of revisions to the paperback of NeuroTribes to incorporate information that guy still wouldn't give me, even after the other book was out. I had to basically recapitulate his research to figure out what he had figured out. But, now I see stuff like Asperger sent hundreds of children to the death camp. It's not. It just didn't happen. It didn't happen. And I don't think we have to lie to make eugenics look bad. My whole book, is very much an argument against eugenics, as Asperger was making himself at the time, actually. But so anyway, I don't want to get, that's a deep rabbit hole, but that's my opinion.
I mean, it's utterly fascinating. And I remember because when I was first diagnosed, it said, which is not a term I particularly like anyway, is autistic spectrum disorder. It's not a term that I like.
Right. I always, when people use the word disorder, I always say, I don't claim to know what the order of the universe is supposed to be. So I love that. Disorder.
No, it's definitely not. It's definitely for me. I mean, I think it's pretty much like for most of us, it's a neurotype. It's just a difference of evolution by the synaptic pruning process. And I'm not going to get into synaptic pruning because I know so much about it. I'll be here all week. It's just evolution. It's so obvious to me that this is supposed to exist. And I think history proves that. And I think that people like Asperger's could see that at the time, like this is supposed to exist. And I think what I liked when you quoted him saying that something about like science wouldn't exist without a sprinkle of autism.
Right. Science and art.
Yes. Art, exactly. Yeah. Because I mean, that's what I am. I'm an artist and I love science. So I look at those two things, which are like two of my favorite things in the world is art and science. And I'm like, for me, being autistic is integral to that. You know, it's integral to change.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I look at the positives so much. And so I completely lost my way there.
No problem. Well, you know, here's the thing. When I started writing about autism, it was a long time ago. It was 2001. I wrote an article for Wired magazine where I was a reporter and editor called The Geek Syndrome about basically Asperger syndrome in Silicon Valley. And when I started writing that article, you know, I was a science writer for Wired magazine, and I had the framing in my mind that was universal at the time among clinicians anyway, that autism was a disorder. It was a syndrome, you know, so I went into it, you know, writing about people with a disorder, the so-called medical model, as neurodivergent self-advocates say now.
Yeah, we do, yeah.
And what sort of helped dislodge the medical model from my mind were a couple of experiences. For one thing, I had read in many, many, you know, sort of autism textbooks that autistic people lack the ability to do pretend play or imaginative play. And one of the kids I interviewed for that article was this adorable, you know, little geek who was building a world on his computer on another planet that had like three gender. The beings who lived there had three genders, and he was making up all these words. And I thought, boy, one thing this kid doesn't lack is the ability to do pretend play. He's a genius at it. Now, Lorna Wing, who came up with that concept, the British cognitive psychologist who came up, or psychiatrist, came up with that concept, told me later, no, I meant using pretend play as a social thing, which it's true. He was building that world in his room. But another sort of moment when I questioned the prevailing view of autism was when I sat behind a one-way mirror at a major university where kids were brought to get diagnosed. And so I'm sitting behind a one-way mirror with a very well-known autism expert whose name I will not mention. But so this kid comes into the room, and he's very energetic and sweet, and he sees a replica of the Star Trek ship Enterprise on a table. He rushes over to it because he loves Star Trek, and he's so into, you know, all the things that he's doing. And I said to the woman, "Are you telling me that this kid will never have friends or any relationships?" And she said, "It's very unlikely." And I thought, really? Like, this kid seems great, you know? And so even back in 2001, I was starting to question the medical model. But then, you know, later on, I went to a conference called Autreat that was run by autistic people for autistic people. And not only were they wonderful to each other, not only did I see that the usual bullet-pointed list of deficits and dysfunctions did not, you know, describe them, but also it was even a more pleasant environment for me in some ways than the typical neurotypical environment, in that, you know, I'm a fat guy. Like, here it is. I never felt any, as they say, shade for being fat at Autreat. It was like, by opening themselves up to the diversity of human minds, they also open themselves up to the diversity of human forms. And it was lovely. And in fact, when I got out of Autreat after spending 4 days there, it was very unpleasant to come back into the neurotypical world where everybody seemed like little Donald Trumps, like running around, promoting themselves and being narcissists. Anyway, so when I came back to my desk where I'm sitting now to continue writing NeuroTribes after going to Autreat, I start typing out the list of deficits and dysfunctions. And I'm like, Steve, this is BS. Like, you were just with these people. They're not like that. And so that was really the big shift.
I think it's incredible that, you're a journalist. You're not a psychiatrist or a so-called, and I always say so-called professional. You're just a journalist who's observing, but you have such a skill of observation. And I wish more people would do this, that they would look at neurodivergence from a completely unique perspective of just observation. So I see a lot of this autism, ADHD research, and it always comes from the deficit. So it always comes from autism is a disorder. Let's look at what causes it. It's never, by the way, this neurotype, this difference is integral to the development of the human species as we know it. But unfortunately, a lot of these people struggle to live in the world that we have currently because there's not enough accommodation for this very, very unique mindset, this very unique way of thinking that has literally changed the world as we know it. Like you said, like we were saying, science and art and music being a type of art, but we have changed the world as we know it. And the thing is as an observer, you went in there from a very neutral perspective of, I want to learn, and you immediately saw the benefits of this neurotype. And yet these professionals, because of their cognitive dissonance, because of their one-track mindedness of this is a bad thing, we have to fix this thing, and still now they can't see it. And it drives me mad how so many of us can see it so obviously, especially those of us who are actually neurodivergent. We can see the huge benefit that we are as a people, and yet I'm still hearing treatment, cures, therapies, and causes, and I'm like, well, the cause is sex. Sex is the cause,
right? Exactly
of neurodivergence. Right. Like, there's nothing else,
right? Yeah. Right. Or as some wit put it online, autism causes vaccines because there have been so many gifted scientists. There have been so many gifted scientists, and the thing is, like, to finish a thought I had earlier. When I started looking at autism initially as a neurotypical journalist, I saw people with a condition or a syndrome or a set of deficits and dysfunctions or whatever. But I very quickly, saw that in fact, it was other ways of being human. And now I don't even think of neurodivergent people as having a common condition. I think of them as just a type of people, like a natural type. Like, you'd look in a garden and you'd see like, oh, those are those flowers that are purple and that, grow really, and those are those which prefer shade, and have yellow flowers. And that's how I see. And it's funny, I don't know which edition of my book you've read, but there was a cover in America. Let me get it, actually. My British publisher, and God bless them because they've treated me very well, but my British publisher said, too cheerful. So the British
sounds about right.
The British, not only that, too cheerful, right? So not only that, they wouldn't use the word neurodiversity in the subtitle. Why? Because they had a meeting of the marketing people, and the marketing people said, "We've never heard of this word." And I said, "Trust me, you're going to hear it a lot, really, really soon." And when I started writing NeuroTribes, neurodiversity, the word neurodiversity was never in the news. So I started a Google, news search about it. Now I get about 50 citations a day of the word neurodiversity in global news. So it was funny. I mean, I'm very grateful to Allen and Unwin in England for publishing my book there. And I ended up winning the Samuel Johnson Prize, which was really or now called the Bailey Gifford Prize.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah, it was the first science book in the history of the prize to ever win, which, believe me, I was shocked myself.
Well, that's a testament to your skill as a journalist and the book that you've written, Steve.
Well, thank you.
I think when I think about that, it actually annoys me, and let me tell you why. Is because it's such a great achievement, and it deserves it. And you would think, oh, okay, this book is amazing. This book is groundbreaking. This book is game changing, and it definitely changed the game for a lot of us, especially in the way that I think there is an entire wave of advocates out there that are there because of your book. It's like that pay it forward. So what you created has then gone on to create, and I created my book, which did the same thing. It affirmed so many people and made so many other people. And it is
that because they told you.
They literally tell me. They message me. They email me. They tell me in person. They write reviews, and so it's true. And I think the reason why it annoys me is because we're listening. We heard you, Steve. Why did these so-called professionals not hear you? Why do you think that they're not listening to us?
Here's the thing. I may have a more optimistic view, which is that a lot of professionals have gotten in touch with me. I can't say who it is because it's still confidential, but a representative of the French government just got in touch with me recently, who really wants to talk about neurodiversity accommodations in the workplace for the French government. So people are
that's
listening.
fantastic.
Yeah, it's really good. Yeah, that just happened, actually. We're going to talk later on in the month. But lots and lots and lots of professionals have gotten in touch with me and said that my book changed their view of autism. So there is a gradual... you can't just wave a hand or write a book for 5 years and expect things to change overnight. A lot of times neurodivergent people come to me and say, "Oh my God, it's so frustrating. I'm so depressed because it takes so long for societal change to happen." And this is what I say. When I was in high school, I'm not officially neurodivergent, but I think it's an interesting question. Is homosexuality a form of neurodivergence? I think there are many arguments to be made for that. When I was in high school, I had crushes on all my, straight best friends. I thought my life would be hopeless. I entertained thoughts of self-harm and suicide. I was bullied. One part of your book that I related to a lot was getting bullied. There were two kids who would wait for me every morning as I walked to junior high school, and beat me up. Ninth grade, actually, beat me up like every morning and spit on me and call me a FAG and all that. And and not only that, if I'd gone to the school nurse and said, "Well, I was actually lusting after my best friend," she could have had me arrested for if I'd ever been so lucky enough to do anything. But look, this is my wedding ring. I'm married. I'm incredibly happily married to a wonderful science teacher whose family, by the way, has neurodivergent traits. Yeah. And so that amount of social change has happened in my lifetime, going from you should be in jail or a mental asylum to even my Republican relatives came to our wedding. So that's a lot of social change, and it happened in relatively short time. So
that's encouraging.
It is, and I have to say, like, I've had the same thing with professionals who have contacted me saying that they've actually changed their language being an incredibly important thing for neurodivergent people, way more important than people give it a lot of credit for.
That's true.
Because I think a lot of it is it's the difference between feeling terrible about yourself and feeling great about yourself. It could be literally a single word. Words are so important, and they've changed their language within clinics. Doctors and professionals have done that. So I suppose what I meant to say, typical in a very neurodivergent way, what I was meant to say is why do people still approach autism and ADHD? They always approach it from the negative. So even when it comes down to the assessments are all deficit based, and it really upsets me because I'll tell you a really quick story. I was doing one of those online assessments with a friend of mine because I was convinced he was neurodivergent. So we did one of those online assessments. None of it's official. It's all like a bit fun, whatever.
Like BuzzFeed sort of articles.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit better than that, but you know what I'm saying. Yeah. But essentially, we both answered it. We both did the same questions. We both hit those neurodivergent markers that I would consider to be very neurodivergent, like monologuing, being very interested, hyperfocus, those sort of things. But the difference between the two of us, which wasn't a difference for me when I first got diagnosed, was I have loads of friends. Like, I have so many friends. I am really social. I'm really great, in around people. As long as everybody knows who I am, I'm fine. It's when people don't know who I am, it makes me very nervous, that unpredictability. But essentially, I'm a very gregarious person. He is not. He is very antisocial. He doesn't really have any friends. He doesn't really like people. I was not autistic anymore. He was highly likely to be autistic. And I went, we answered all the same questions, exactly the same.
Yeah.
Except he said he didn't like people, and I said I did. And I was like, that's terrible. That's so bad. And that's like within the last year.
Yeah.
And I just think, and that is the issue for me. It is always deficit based. So when a child or an adult goes through an assessment, it's what can't you do? What can't you do? How do you suffer? How do you struggle? And it shouldn't be about that. It should be about that, but it should also be about what are you good at? What are your talents? What can you do?
What turns you on? Yeah.
A lot, Steve, to be fair.
Yeah. Oh, right. Oh, I see. We'll talk later. I'm on OnlyFans, so I'm just kidding. I'm not. But
well, hello there.
In any case,
me. I might do some of that. Yeah.
So, on the frontier of changing language, I don't like to be a stickler about stuff like this, but one thing that amuses me, like if people use the word neurodiversity in the wrong way, I tend not to bust them hard, as some neurodivergent people do, because I feel like, well, they're trying, that's better. But one thing that I think is funny is there's a little sort of genre of trying articles these days that say, like, my daughter has neurodiversity. Well, no, it's actually the human species that has neurodiversity.
Yes. I'm so glad you brought this up, Steve, because we have an episode. We have an early episode called the, myths, myth busting episode. And my first one that I always hear is the difference between neurodiversity and neurodivergence. And neurodiversity is everyone, including neurotypicals, and neurodivergence is everyone except neurotypicals. But then I add another one. I've got my own one, which is called TAN, which is, it's just that's how it's ended up. It's the alternative neurotype, which is those of us who are neurodivergent who are born neurodivergent, because obviously neurodivergent can be PTSD and trauma and OCD and things that you pick up through childhood. But those of us who are born, those of us who go through that different synaptic pruning process, and I don't like to say lack, because I think that it actually ends up, we end up with more synaptic pathways, especially those of infants, which is why we can be all ages at all times. It just fits into place. It's fascinating to me. The brain is fascinating.
Yeah.
But essentially that's what I came up with, this TAN, which is the alternative neurotype, which has to exist. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, because like from the man himself, who essentially sort of brought neurodiversity to the world, you are actually saying neurodiversity is everyone and neurodivergence is everyone but neurotypicals.
Yes.
And now I can go and tell everyone I got what Steve Silberman told me. So,
Well, probably the worst formulation of that trying model is living with neurodiversity. It's like,
oh God.
Does that mean you have a cat named Neurodiversity?
Yes. I did this thing, Steve, where I go and do talks in schools. So and I always take my Winnie the Pooh bear. He's my original Winnie the Pooh, and I take him with me to do the school talks, because I use him for stimming and self comforting. And I take him there, and I make a joke, and I say, "Oh, his name is Autism, and I live with him, and I live with autism." just so I can show you how silly it sounds. It's like it's not a best friend that visits over Christmas. Yeah. It's we are autistic, and the amount of strange phrases that I come across that I'm just like, are you hearing? And one of them, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, because I think I'm pretty much the first person that's ever thought of this. I don't know if I am, but I think I am, is everybody says on the spectrum. Would you agree? Everyone says on the spectrum.
They do, yes.
But the idea of the spectrum is not a linear. It is a encompassing, almost like an atom. So I'm a big fan of science. Here's my atom, and
that's great.
And my deoxyribonucleic acid, because I'm fancy like that. Yeah, right.
My husband knits hats with DNA in the pattern. My husband does.
That is beautiful.
Very cool.
Yeah. I want one now.
I want to get you for your birthday, John.
That could be arranged, probably.
I love that. I love deoxyribonucleic. No, now I'm messing up. Well, you'll have to edit that out, otherwise it's fine. Deoxyribonucleic acid. Anyway, so it's an all-encompassing thing. The spectrum, as it were, is all-encompassing. We can be in any place. There's no high, there's no low, there's no severe, there's no mild. We're all a bit spicy. So I said, well, we're not on it, we're in it.
We're
in the spectrum. So that's what I've started saying, and other people started saying it as well.
I say it a lot now,
That's and great. Now we are not on the spectrum, we're in the spectrum.
That's great. Son, I am about to give you a very important blessing. Because I did one of the last interviews with Lorna Wing, who is the British cognitive psychiatrist who invented the spectrum, the concept of the spectrum, based on the ideas of Asperger and his colleagues. One of the things that we talked about was that I asked her what was frustrating about the way that idea had been received by society. And she said, people always talk about the spectrum as if it's linear, like it runs from low to high or extreme to mild. Or I never meant the spectrum to be linear. I meant it to be more like three-dimensional, where everybody occupies their individual point in a space that was the spectrum, but it was not a line. So you're not only not the first person to think of that, Lorna Wing, who was the first person to think of the spectrum, thought of that too. So that's actually one of the most important things that I tell people. And I'm very against, since we're talking about language, I'm very against the low functioning, high functioning dichotomy or binary.
Indeed,
because it's
yes,
simply inaccurate. Like, it's not like, oh, it's not nice. It's inaccurate. And as a young autistic woman said, if they tell you that you're low functioning, they deny your skills and potential. And if they tell you you're high functioning, they deny your challenges and struggles. And so when I do not use low functioning versus high functioning. And I also think it's problematic to talk about severe autism. Not that, and what I am not doing is I am not denying that some people are extremely challenged by their autism. One of the people I write about at great length in the book is this kid, Leo Rosa, in the chapter called The Boy Who Loves Green Straws. And he's basically nonverbal. When I met him, it took him about 3 days to even notice I was in the room, it seemed. But that was actually wrong. That was a wrong perception of mine, because he did a really cool thing. The first 2 days, he would just kind of walk past me without even seeming to see me. And then the third day, he walked into the room and he just bumped his head into my shoulder and then walked past. So he'd been seeing me, which is so sweet, and he's still, basically nonverbal. And so, he still has a lot of challenges. But his parents, as I talk about in the book, started out as like anti-vaxxers, and we're going to cure Leo, and, we're going to throw a lot of money at this problem. He is a very, very happy neurodivergent person. And his mother is very, very happy, not writing editorials about how no one understands how much she suffers or whatever, And so I do think that more attention should be paid to the struggles of non-speaking autistic people, primarily providing them with technology that helps them express their thoughts and feelings, if possible. There's a wonderful movie I can recommend. I don't know if it's where it's available online in the UK, but it's called This Is Not About Me, and it's about a young woman named Jordan Zimmerman, who was considered completely unteachable when she was young. She had meltdowns, she was angry, she was non-speaking, and her parents were basically told that she would have to spend her life in institutions. Well, she just got a master's degree in special education because she got hooked up with the right teachers who gave her AAC, alternative and augmentative communication, able to type, to speak her thoughts. And once she could express herself, a lot of her anger went away.
It's what I've said many times, is that we don't need curing, we need accommodation.
Mm-hmm.
We need support. I've met non-speaking autistic people or people with limited communication skills that have the most incredible minds. And it breaks my heart knowing that so many people look straight through them, like they're just a burden. And it's heartbreaking, because like if those people were given a chance, and this is a whole thing for me, is the fact that the world we live in doesn't seem to accommodate our potential. Reaching your potential as a neurodivergent individual is possibly one of the hardest things for most humans to do. And that's because of the way that society overall looks at us as like this thing to be fixed, or this broken version of a neurotypical, and it still thinks that. And this is why I love showing my photography and basically saying to people, this picture, these pictures that I take, this is because I'm neurodivergent. I can do this, and I learned how to take pictures that have been on the front covers of the leading magazines on the planet of photography, critically acclaimed photos that I took I took them a week after I picked up my first camera. A week. And I have proof of that. It was after my birthday. I went and took a picture called Pony Heaven, which won awards and was on telly and on magazines. And I look at that, and that's when I go, look what being neurodivergent can do. And I'm not unique. I am one of so many of us. And it took me 37 years to find the thing that I'm really good at. Because when I was at school, I actually did, this is crazy. When I was at school, I did a photography, what we call a GCSE, when I was about 16. I did that and I was really interested, but because I was so badly bullied, and by the way, this is the first time I've ever told this to anybody, because I was so badly bullied, I ended up skipping out on school and getting into lots of fights. And I never actually finished my photography exams. And I wanted to be a photographer when I was a kid. And that left me because I associated so badly with how I was treated and I became a very angry person because of how I was treated. And I never got a chance to reach my potential again because how I was treated. And it really upsets me because there's so many kids. And I remember when I went into a school once, there was a kid that had this amazing art. He must have been about 8 or 9. And he came and after my talk, he showed me his art. And Steve, it was amazing. So I said to the teacher, I said, how often does he get to do this? And he goes, oh, we do art once a week. And I went, this kid should be doing art every day. There shouldn't be a once a week. I said, this kid should be doing art every day. Because why can't this kid be an artist? Why is it so important for you to say, oh, this kid should do what everyone else does? Why are we not just encouraging special interest to be something better?
Yeah. And that was something, by the way, that Hans Asperger talked about a lot. There was one of the kids in his clinic, when he was like 3, he started drawing triangles and circles in the sand. He was clearly obsessed by geometry. And he was lucky because his mother, who talked to Asperger and his colleagues, instead of saying, will you stop that? Just do something normal for it, she encouraged his interest in geometry. Then when he was in school, he was considered incapable of taking advanced math classes because he was, clearly autistic. And he sort of badgered his teachers into giving him advanced tutoring in math. He ended up going on to university, where in his freshman year, he detected an error in one of Isaac Newton's proofs. And he went on to become assistant professor of astronomy. And so special interests are, that's one of the things that neurodivergent people are teaching society, that special interests are the royal road into a meaningful life for people in the spectrum. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me think of Tiger Woods and Michael Jordan if their fathers had not put a club or a basketball in their hand 1,000 times a day, where we may have lost the goats of their sport. Right. It makes me think of how many people in society, how much society has lost by not allowing people to fully embrace their special interests. Just going back to the book, Steve, when we're talking about the legacy of autism, do you think people think smarter about people who think differently now?
I do, but I have a very unusual perspective because they all send me emails. So, but as I say, I'm like reading, 50, or I'm not reading them all, but I see like 50 news stories a day that talk about the concept of neurodiversity. And, that seems hopeful. I do think that the general perspective on autism has shifted slightly. The Beat Generation poet Gary Snyder in America once talked about moving the world a millionth of an inch. And I feel like my book did move the world a millionth of an inch, which makes me glad I was alive and then didn't waste my life, But I mean, there's plenty of more work to be done, needless to say. And in some ways, there's even been a backlash, I would say, to some of that growth, because now you have Nicole Shanahan, who is the vice presidential pick for Robert Kennedy Jr., who is a spoiler candidate backed by far-right money to enable Donald Trump to win. She's talking about autism as a chronic illness caused by pollution and all that.
Goodness, here
and
we go.
So, and of course, RFK Jr. is very anti-vax, repeating all the lies, all the BS, all the myths, all the word. And he talks about
so harmful.
People. It's so harmful. He talks about, their brains are dead. They're zombies. It's as if, he might as well be in Germany, but in any case, so I did not anticipate that. I also did not anticipate Nazis marching in the streets of America while I was writing about Nazis marching through Vienna when I was writing NeuroTribes. So in some ways, American society has faced some really serious setbacks in the last few years because of Trump and the GOP. But I'm going to keep fighting.
It's very scary.
It's very scary. But, I do think that the mobilization of the neurodivergent community will be a valuable force for good in the battles that will be coming.
No, I couldn't agree more, Steve. And I, as a student of history, I often find it baffling that with a bit of research and a bit of cognitive appreciation for what's come before us, we could so learn from the mistakes of what has come before. And yet we choose to be stuck in this feedback loop of hell where we just ask the same questions and don't really listen to any of the quite clear answers that are in front of us. I think we really come to a halt with that. But again, looking at the past, and I'm currently once again listening to the chapter about Kanner in the book. And I have to ask Steve, do you think he stole the idea of autism and just turned it into whatever he would get him a paper?
Well, I don't think he was that bad. And I do think he had good intentions in one way, which is that, he and his wife were heroes in terms of rescuing Jewish clinicians from a certain death in the concentration camps.
Undoubtedly, yes.
Most crucially, and this was for autism history nerds, the biggest scoop in my book, this was a world-changing revelation for autism history experts, was that Kanner's assistant, George Frankl, had been Asperger's assistant in Vienna. And so when Kanner saw his first autistic patient, a guy named Donald T., who, by the way, passed away not that long ago and had a very happy life, by the way, he had breakfast with this same group of friends every weekday morning, which I thought was really sweet. I don't even get to do that.
How nice.
But in any case, so what I think was, I think that Kanner and Asperger, and it is pronounced Connor, even though it looks like Kanner, but some of the patients used to call him Father O'Connor, which is hilarious. But in any case, Asperger and Kanner had different jobs, and that led them to treat autism differently. Asperger's job was to rehabilitate kids who had been, cast out of schools and funneled through the juvenile courts to the clinic. Whereas Leo Kanner was attempting to prove that child psychiatry was a valid field in America. And to do that, Kanner latched onto autism as a childhood disorder that could only be treated not by the parents or anything, but by, intensive psychoanalysis and institutionalization. And so Kanner was trying to validate a whole field of psychiatry, whereas Asperger and his colleagues were just trying to find ways for their kids to fit into society in hopefully a helpful way and add their value to our society. So I think, I definitely think that Kanner lied about never having read Asperger's paper. And I thought about this a lot. I mean, Asperger's paper came out, in the early 1940s. And so people say, well, of course Kanner didn't read it. It was in German, Kanner's native language. Well, of course Kanner didn't read it. It was in this obscure German medical journal that nobody wanted to hear about, because of the Nazis. Kanner cited that journal all the time. And, he did not mention Asperger's name until like 40 years later or something like that. And he said something like, the condition that it's in the book, I believe, my book, the condition that man wrote about bears no relation to the childhood disorder that blah, blah, blah. So I think he did self-promote in that way, but I don't think it's, you could say, well, if Connor stole it from Asperger, did Asperger steal it from Grunya Sukareva, a Russian psychiatrist who wrote about kids who were very delightfully recognizable as having Asperger syndrome back in the 20s. But she called it schizotypical. So, the word autism, these ideas are out there. I don't think Connor stole the idea. He stole the clinician in a sense, but he rescued him from the, ovens. And so Connor definitely got the help of, sort of Asperger and Frankel's accumulated expertise and humanistic perspective. But unfortunately, he was unable to find Frankel a job at Johns Hopkins. So they went away, George Frankel and Ani Weiss. Connor was working with two of Asperger's former contacts in Austria. They went away, and then Connor was at liberty to define autism in a very narrow way, to suggest that it was extremely rare, to suggest that the only way to deal with it is to give the parents, decades of psychoanalysis, blaming them, really. Why do I had parents tell me that who went to psychiatrists during this period, and the psychiatrist would say, "Why do you hate your children so much?" It's
I remember listening to that. It was awful.
Yeah, it's horrible.
I wonder, the damage that was done with this misconception of what autism and neurodivergence is by Connor. And let's be fair, he did have a lot of cognitive dissonance. He didn't really want to listen to other people, it seems. He very much wanted it to be the way he said, and he needed to be right, as a lot of these people have always seemed to be, which is very unscientific, I've always thought.
Yes,
I think the most scientific thing is admitting, I made a mistake, and I'm glad that you've corrected it. Thank you very much for proving me wrong. Now we can move on with the science, because the science should always be more important than somebody's ego. But with a lot of people like Connor, it wasn't. And I feel like he opened the door, as it were, to all this negativity that still exists today. Even when with ADHD, I still hear, it's just bad parenting. You still hear this now.
Or naughty children.
Yeah, and I'm going to say something that I don't think I've ever said in public before, but it's really an interesting way to look at it, which is that I think that some of the force driving the vaccine skepticism, which is now has reached completely hellish dimensions with the GOP, the Republicans in New Hampshire, now no longer requiring polio or measles vaccines for childcare. They just had that vote last week. Like, hello, iron lungs. Like, polio vaccine was one of the greatest scientific accomplishments of humankind, So now they're going to get rid of it. I think that's one of the forces driving that is parental guilt left over from the Connor age of blaming parents for autism, because parents hear, no, it's actually vaccines that cause autism. And even though it's completely wrong, they embrace it because at least it's not blaming them.
Yes.
Ugh.
Which frustrates me, because I think anybody in the know knows that it's hereditary, it's evolution, it's genetics, it's supposed to exist. It is passed on through the ages, to, like I said before, to advance the human species. And yes, we have incredibly impaired individuals that are disabled, more so because of their being autistic. But we also, I think a lot of people look at people like that and just assume that they can't do anything, assume that they are incapable of amazing things. And I think that's the worst thing, isn't that there's a lot of impaired autistic people that require a lot of support. I think it's the fact that nobody appreciates that those people are also have incredible minds and are capable of incredible things.
Yeah, exactly. And imagine, we have accommodations for physical disability. Imagine if people said, who cares about wheelchairs and accessible restrooms? Someday, with the help of science, everyone will walk. That's basically been the approach of science to cognitive disabilities. How do we make these people normal? Not like, how do we make their lives better? How do we make them normal?
I did have one more really important question I really wanted I just wanted to ask you about this is the idea, and I mentioned this in my book, is snake oil salesman. And it was the first time that I'd ever heard about all these people doing cures and basically conning parents into thinking that they could cure their kid, and the only way they could cure them was to buy the stuff that they were selling or to do the treatments that they were selling.
Saunas.
Yeah.
And why do you think that still exists?
People are much more, okay. I completely understand that parents feel like there are very few resources for their children. And so it's getting better, but it's still really difficult. And so, if somebody comes along and says, well, you have to flush the lead out of their systems because the heavy metals are causing, and then they have a whole industry, an elaborate, multiple industries set up to reinforce these concepts of autism as a disease that can be cured. So there are labs, as I write about in NeuroTribes, there are labs where you send your, clippings of your children's hair. And then the clippings come back and they say, oh yes, your child has too much selenium. But luckily, this company, which is also, by the way, owned by the owner of the lab, sells anti-selenium flushing pills.
What a coincidence.
Yes, what a coincidence.
Imagine that.
And so there, through the 80s and 90s, it was a vast industry because stuff that is not considered an official pharmaceutical is barely regulated in the US. And so they could sell all kinds of things. And you had people prescribing, there were people who were doing castration to cure autism.
It's a horrific.
Yeah.
We as a people have been through horrific treatment at the hands of neurotypicals trying to make us like them. And it continues today with ABA therapy. So my last question, Stephen, I really appreciate you being here. I really do.
Thank you so much.
It's been an honor. Yeah, thank you.
My last question to you, Steve, is to all the people listening, to all the parents listening who worry about their autistic children, what advice would you give them to help them reach their potential?
Well, this is the advice that I would give. One of the lessons that I felt I learned from looking deeply into, more than half a century of autism history was that the most dire predictions that are made about children by medical authorities, by teachers, etc., the children often find ways to grow up and become autistic adults and thrive that give the lie to those dire predictions. And so, one of the parents that I wrote about in the book, when his daughter was born and then diagnosed, he was told, your daughter is autistic. We have very little idea of what she'll be capable of. She's really no different than an animal. Well, she also just got her master's degree in special education. So don't believe the most dire predictions. Ensure that your child, if you're a parent, gets support from within the spectrum community, from other neurodivergent people. If you don't know any or know where to find them, in America, you can. There's an organization called AANE. I think they've taken Asperger's name out of it, but it's a good organization. I'm about to talk to next week. I'm going to have a Zoom with Aut Angel, which is a group of older, most of them late diagnosed autistic women in London. Find your people, if you're an autistic adult, and you can find them in books as well as, in meetings. And for parents, don't believe the worst things that everyone is telling you about your child. Have hope, have faith. And yes, it's true. Not every autistic person will learn to speak verbally, but maybe they could learn to type on a keyboard, and just help them find their way to their own way of being the best person that they can possibly be.
Steve, that was incredible. I would like to add also to every parent out there, read NeuroTribes. Oh, and my book.
Yes, read his
the
book
Autistic
too.
Experience.
Yes.
Which is officially now supported by Steve Silberman.
Amendments to get the quote in.
Which has made my life, actually. Like, there is no day, week, or month. You reading my book and saying what you said has made me, honestly. Steve, I have nothing but absolute pure love in my heart for you.
Oh,
thank you. Thank you for existing. Thank you for those 5 years. Thank you for everything since then. Thank you for being you. And thank you for coming on the Neurodivergent experience. It has been one of the most incredible moments of my life, and definitely the most incredible moment I've had since I've been doing this.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. And I've been very honored to be here. And Simon, thanks for everything you did as well.
No, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure for me, and what you've brought to our community, Steve, cannot be understated. It's you've been a gift. So for anybody that is, please go and read this book. You can find NeuroTribes: The Legacy of Autism at most bookstores across the UK and the US. It's been translated into 15 languages, so no excuse
25
not to read
now,
it. So
actually,
Steve,
believe it or not.
25. Yeah. Oh, I had to update my notes. That's absolutely incredible. Even more people that see our NeuroTribe gets bigger every single day.
And it's
Steve,
an Audible, which is great.
Wow, what an incredible interview that was, Jordan. I'm so looking forward to going back and listening to that over and over again. And I'm sure you guys as well will have found some inspiration, some knowledge, or some moment of reassurance from that conversation, because I'm absolutely full of those things right now. I could have listened to Steve talk for hours and hours. So if you've enjoyed what you've heard, please subscribe to hear more from us on other episodes like this, because some of the guests we've got coming up, guys, I can't wait to share with you. Please rate and leave a review on this podcast. It does really help. It's absolutely invaluable. As always, Jordan, say goodbye to the lovely listeners.
Steve Silberman read my book.
Steve Silberman read your book.
He liked it. He said it was really good. And now I'm really happy. Goodbye to the people, Jordan. Bye. I'm going to go and stim myself to sleep.
Ooh.